Lead the charge.
So episode 3, it looks like we're here, and ironically enough, there's 3 people on episode 3.
Look at that.
And this is our first guest. So Jason's a dear friend of ours, as well as the president of the Calgary Surge, and kind of a big deal from my perspective.
It's a pretty big deal, Kai.
Yeah, I say so.
I think we can let him introduce himself.
Oh, well, look, first of all, I'm honored to be the first guest, and congratulations to you guys on this. This is, again, like before I get into my stuff, like being there along the ride for the journey, just watching you guys, it's just like surreal to have these moments, especially ones that are more out there, right? Like you guys have grinded for so long, and now to see you guys be more front facing is just like a beautiful thing. But yeah, like Jason Ribeiro, vice chairman and president of the Calgary Surge. But above all that, I usually, and this is such a weird thing, how do you intro yourself? What is it? How do you convey who you are? And I try not to overthink it and just say, like, in terms of priorities, you know, I'm a proud husband, a very grateful and proud dad to this beautiful boy, and one on the way. But you know, aside from that, professionally, you know, I have this weird life where I get to do all things Calgary, right? You think about, you know, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary. Obviously, you know, with this venture with the Calgary Surge, I'm a public affairs commentator for Global News Calgary. I'm on the board of Sport Calgary. And so I try and distill it down to, I try and do the right things at home with my family, and I try to do the right things for the city. And I'm aware that I have this privileged position to do all these things for the city that I love. So that's how I probably ended up here and with you guys. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, and it's been an awesome journey to get to this point, right? I think, did you feel like this was unexpected?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not something that we planned. It was something that we definitely didn't plan 8 years ago, but I think it's been amazing to kind of see it. And I think it's starting to really click in with the event that you had last week and just the pictures you released and everything. It's cool. It's surreal.
Yeah. And I, you know, was so excited to share that with you guys. And I remember at that event, like I very quietly said, and what was so interesting was you guys were at the event talking to the players and living your best lives. And I had,
that's a good way to put it.
We were having some fun. There were some good pictures.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen you guys so happy in those pictures that came out, but I sent you a photo of the jersey, which I'll show you guys, you know, live in person to touch and feel in a minute. But I was like, I walked in with my wife and my son, and I'm like, they haven't mentioned the photos to me. It's been like an hour, and then I'm like, they've been so caught up in mingling and talking, whatever. I'm sure they haven't seen it. And I remember I asked you, I'm like, have you guys seen your phones? You guys checked your, oh my God, and just lost it. So, you know, these, you know, obviously don't do it justice when they were, because they're not on players' bodies, but, you know, these are them.
Yeah, they're
Man.
Got the shorts.
Yeah, seeing it in person is
Crazy. Yeah.
Well, there's something special about these shorts as well, too. I think they play homage to a very specific era, right?
Yeah, I think, look, you know, you acquire a basketball team, and you think the things that you think are the really cool things to do, which are design and jersey and master, become intensely like stressful, right? Because you want them to be wavy, you want them to be cool, you want them to signify what you want people to feel. And I think for a city that hasn't had a basketball team for so long, and when it has, it's been this very sort of smaller kind of venture. But eyes are on us, right? And I think the pressure we put on ourselves was to come correct. And so the significance was certainly, you know, in my mind when we went down this path, August, the two influences that I had in my mind were 90s Bulls. You know, I think, you know, Calgary's this great history of red and black, but it hasn't leaned into that aesthetic as much. And then the other piece was, as I've told you guys, which is we're giving very AC Milan vibes over here, is that like they've done such an exceptional job at taking the same colorways, red, black, and white, and elevating it so the pinstripe on the jerseys, like people will notice, like it's an actual pinstripe. Like it's literally every single one individually, where most teams, you know, aren't doing that. That level of care and detail really mattered to us. But to see the Zeno logo on the shorts, on the shirt, and have the guys tell me privately, it's so cool that we have like a cool sponsor. Because that's not a given, right? Like they feel the energy from you guys, they feel the momentum from the company, they feel it match the city, and they feel it match the team and the organization that they're playing for. So very surreal moment for us, but I'm sure for you guys as well.
Yeah, and I think for us, going back to that evening, and the evening that we're alluding to was the season ticket holders appreciation night, as well as the introduction to the players and the team, as well as the supporting staff. So it was an important evening, and we had shown up to National on 10th. For those who don't know where that is, definitely go check it out. They have an amazing selection of beers, and it's a good place to spend an evening. But ultimately, my biggest takeaway from that night, beyond just it being surreal, and you and I had a moment as well too there for which was interesting, but that one's for us. But my takeaway beyond that was that the selection of the players is very interesting, and even the way that you go about your day-to-day life, the thoughtfulness that you have within your position and how your family fits into that, and even the pinstriping that you just spoke about. I think he's got to be one of the most detail-oriented people that we know. And I think Kai and I always end up leaving conversations with you where we feel like, man, I didn't look at things from that perspective, or I didn't go to that level of depth. And even Dan Balaban, we were having a conversation about this, right? And hopefully Dan will be on the podcast at one point too.
For sure.
I think that's something that you're known for, right? Now, is that level of detail something that was taken into consideration when you were selecting the players and going through that process? And what was that like?
It's an interesting question. Like, and as much as it feels like a gift sometimes, it's a curse, right? Like I notice every little thing. It's the way my mind works. And then it puts me in a position where I have to determine, do I act on that detail or do I sacrifice it for the meso or the macro? Like, do I get out of the micro, or is this a situation where the micro details matter? And like from the jersey perspective, they mattered, because I've seen teams where it's just like a straight line down the jersey, and I was just like, that's not the vision, right? And so to get that right, and we had an amazing designer help us with that, was really important. But to your broader point, with where the players were concerned, it's been such a unique experience for me, because growing from this business grew from a text message between Usman and I in August to now it's an over 100-person operation overnight, and here we are in May. And you realize you can't get into the details of all those different things. And so with the players, I gave a high-level directive to our general manager, Shane James. And it was the same directive I know was conveyed to our head coach, Nelson Taroba, which was there are just certain things we can't compromise on, which were values. These individuals had to be value aligned. And I think, you can tell in a moment your interactions with the players and how you felt about it. But that was, we couldn't compromise on that. It wasn't, from an integrity perspective, Usman and I, it wasn't what we wanted to do for the community. So that was one. And then secondly, it was of that commitment to excellence. And that commitment to excellence manifests itself in details. So I've tried to stay away from the basketball operations and those details, but I'll just randomly find myself going to a training camp or a practice or whatever. And it's people who are putting up those shots. I see on IG the guys in their condos going to the gym at 11 o'clock or 5 a.m. or whatever. It's those micro level details on the court and off the court that matter. So definitely I think it had a role to play, but frankly, it's one of the ones where I kind of stayed out of the weeds and trusted people to do their work thoughtfully and intentionally, and hopefully they are paying attention to the details in the work that they do.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I suppose even that in itself has a level of care and detail to it as well, because the people that you selected to be able to do that, how careful were you in that specific process?
Oh, yeah, that was a careful one, because, Usman and I've always thought about this, like, this is, we feel really closely connected to Calgary, right? And we've obviously lived pretty full lives for being in our 30s. That have allowed us to do all these cool things that certainly apply to launching a professional basketball team, but we haven't been involved in a professional sports franchise before. So that interview process, and it was myself and our VP, Dylan Howe, who participated in it specifically for the general manager. And I came in with some preconceived notions. Dylan had told me, he said, hey, and Dylan, as you guys know, was with the previous franchise in Guelph that moved to Calgary. And he was the kind of diamond in the rough because he knew what we didn't know. This guy knows how to lay the court. This guy knows the ticketing software. This guy knows all the things we don't.
Yeah, and he always shows up well dressed and ready to go.
Yeah. I've put the battery in his back to do that, and he's seeing him grow has been a really beautiful experience because there's always another level, right? And he told me privately, he's like, the things we're getting to do now with this franchise are things that I had in my mind, but we just didn't know if we could execute on. And some of that's because of the city. It's a great media market, et cetera, but also it's because he has that permission and the confidence to take that risk and do it. But, in that process, he talked to me about Shane, because Shane was the assistant general manager. And I looked at Guelph's record and I said, kind of finished, I think, above 500 once, made the playoff either once or twice in their 4 years. And I was like, well, we could get a name, or we could get someone, or we could get this, and let's go through that process. And I didn't really have Shane in the back of my mind. And we go through the process and we get the names all coming in, and I get to Shane, and as comfortable as Usman and I are, as comfortable as we are talking, as comfortable as we and the MCA guys are, it felt like that for me. And that was very reassuring. But this is a performance-based business. And I'll tell you, on his resume was Brian Colangelo, who was the former president of the Toronto Raptors. And I immediately looked at it, I said, get the hell out of here. Like, what do you put it? Like, don't put the biggest name that you know. And he said, no, call him. I'm like, I don't want to call him, and he has no context for who you are. He's like, call him. And I called Brian on a weekend. And I thought this was going to be a 5-minute one and done thing. He stayed on the phone with me for an hour and a half and talked to me about Shane, talked to me about the program that Shane had built, talked about how well organized and professional and detail oriented he was, and how calm he was. And in some...
Yeah, he was super
Like,
calm.
that's how he comes off.
He had like this crazy energy about him where it's just, you feel like all of a sudden everything just stabilizes.
Yeah. No, and we're, they're going to be high-strung moments. And to have that there from a roster construction perspective is critical. And so ultimately that's what made the difference and made the choice easier. And frankly, it's been a joy to work with him. It's been a joy to work with the staff that he's put together. And so that's, again, the ethos of trust, but he's managing the details there on the player side. And I think it's manifesting on the court and certainly manifesting in community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think trust in terms of building it is always something, it's actually something we've talked about a fair amount in this podcast already in the first 2 episodes. And even when it came down to selecting individuals on our team, especially when you're doing something new, there's 2 levels of trust, right? And I think, Kai, you really understand the first one in regards to just like letting go of what do we call it? Letting go of the rope or letting go of the bind?
Yeah, letting go of the bind, I think is the key thing that we usually do with the company, is just understanding someone's ability and letting them just run with it, right? And I think we saw that. Like, I know we saw that before the event last week, but you can see in the individuals on your team that like they definitely have done that, or you've done that. Yeah. And that makes you guys good leaders, right? At the end of the day, showing that leadership was it's impressive. And I think interacting with the team members and the players and just seeing what they're saying to us, I think we had a few of them even come up to us and thank us for sponsoring the team, which is unheard of, right? Like that's something that we were like, they don't have to do that, right? They have there's nothing in them. No, exactly.
Yeah,
and now, 100% you could tell it was authentic. And it's like, they don't have to do any of that, but that's leadership on your guys' side from picking them and stuff. So
yeah. And I'll be vulnerable for a moment. Like what's so interesting talking to my friends that are entrepreneurs, right, is you talk about trust and you talk about learning through failure and you talk about doing. And what's different about this business is that it's so magnified. It's one thing to trust when the fall is internal. It's one thing to trust when there's not flashing lights and media and all those kinds of things. And so the level of intensity and vulnerability and the level of trust you have to give is big, right? And while you're very gracious in crediting us in some ways, and I think we've done some things right, personally, I've held the vine a little bit, maybe longer than I should have in some respects. And I think that's where, I've been so supremely impressed with the discipline, the patience, and the thoughtfulness of the members of our team to know, hey, it may seem like a control thing at first. it may seem like, hey, he doesn't trust me enough. But I think what they've hopefully grown to understand, especially in those early days, right? Like in early stages of any venture is always chaotic, was that I was trying to protect them, right? Because I was trying to, because we're the guys. Like I'm always going to be out front and taking the arrows and stuff like that. But it was to protect them, to give them the time to get to a place where they could execute that. And maybe they felt they could execute on day one. That's fine. That's those are the breaks. But then also too, to understand like, hey, this is a different animal. Like this is a different beast. And I don't want the fall, if there ever is one, and there's going to be them. We talked about that even off camera, like with game day coming in a few days. Like there's going to be those. But at least if we held it back, if we held it until we thought you were ready and then let you fly, this is the time to fly. And the fact that we've gone from August to now, and I'll say this really publicly, like, again, not knowing what we're really doing to a certain respect in this business, to not have a major error, for everything to look crisp, for everything to be presented in that way, has been the joy, the joy of my life. And I give all credit to them. Like they've been patient, they've been thoughtful, and they've just done amazing work. I'm so proud of them.
No, that's amazing to hear. And I think that speaks a lot about not necessarily who you are as a person, but all of the people that have allowed you or enabled you, perhaps is probably the better word, to get to where you are today. Now, Kai and I obviously know your story on a little bit of a deeper level, I guess let's call it at a bro level, right? I think there's certain things and attributes about that will probably come out over time. But in the essence of this conversation, I think it all comes back down to standards. And ultimately, individuals that are leaders have a very uncomfortable position, in my opinion, where they have to constantly put the bar here. Now, the bar can never be met if you want to be able to ensure that you're constantly reaching that level. And do you find in your organization, once you've established this, that you're holding that line, or you're just inching it higher and higher and higher so that you have something to continue pursuing?
That's a really good way of putting it. And I'd be curious on your take on this as well, because like literally seeing the growth from the virtuoso days to now, like you think about even just the room we're in, like it's clearly there's a standard that's been held here, right? To be able to do all of these things, for the truck to look the way that it does, like the standard was enforced probably long ago to reach this point. It's just it's 8 years versus less than 1, right? So for me, I think that the challenge that I've been wrestling with is you can hold a standard that you have, but if it only lives and breathes in your heart and your mind, and people aren't given the tools or the pathways to be able to meet that standard, that's going to be the challenge. And the difficulty of this journey has been that takes time. It takes collective time for you as an organization. It takes time with you and those individuals to really go through and upskill and train and coach. And my schedule, you can imagine, Usman's, et cetera. Sometimes we're operating in a very time constrained environment. So it's forced me to be way more pithy. It's forced me to choose my words a little bit differently, where in previous executive situations, I got to wax poetic for 2 hours with someone and really just walk them through. And frankly, sometimes they don't get that access, your staff or your employees. And the fact that you're taking that time to listen to them, to hear them, is all the difference. And they'll pick up the 10 or maybe that could have been conveyed in 20 minutes, but they'll pick up that 20 minutes plus they'll feel the dedication that you spend. So if you take away that time and you take away that 20 minutes and down to 5 of what you have to do, it requires an implicit amount of trust that happens over time. And so I think I've not certainly compromised where the standard is. And I think Usman holds that line. Now our VPs, Brittany and Dylan, have adopted that as their own. And I think maybe in closing, and this is maybe my probe back to you, is I'm seeing the evolution from that's Jason's standard, Jason wants, and Usman's wants, and et cetera, to this is who we are as Surge. Surge basketball doesn't do this. The Calgary Surge aren't this. This is what we have agreed to as an organization. How has that evolution been from, again, a similar situation where it's been you two to now here's what Virtuoso does to here's what Zeno does? How have you guys navigated that in terms of the standard quandary?
I'm going to quote somebody here in relation to your answer, and he's a very controversial figure, but at one level, I know all of us like him.
Okay.
There's other levels about him that we don't like, and it's Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
And I believe he says it this way. He says that precision beats power and timing beats speed. Now, where that comes into play for us, and I've seen Kai do it beautifully, is, as you know, Kai's sitting here, he's contemplative. The words that he says are typically very powerful and measured. And that's something that I've learned from him spending so much time with him, is that specific statement of the precision beats power, right? Because if you're sitting in a conversation, and let's create a hypothetical scenario where we're in a boardroom and we have to make decisions and we have an hour. You can go guns blazing into that meeting and say, this is what I want, this is when I want it, and so on and so forth. But what you're saying is more in alignment with what we believe, is that everybody needs to be able to say their part, and then ultimately you come in at the end with the precision. And that also comes in from a timing perspective. It might not mean that the last minute of the meeting is where you stand your ground. It's where the opening in the valley becomes nice and visible, and you're like, okay, that's the path, and we're going to shoot right down the middle. And then that's where the timing comes into play, right? In time, in relation with the precision. And I believe that's how we've naturally grown over time, is oddly enough, with Conor McGregor's phrase in mind, is that's how I believe that things have gone.
What about you, Kai?
Yeah, I think, that was really well said. I think everything when it comes to the standard that we set, we started at a standard that we felt was better than the industry. Mm-hmm. And then we realized that we can actually be this much better than the industry. And the industry had set a standard that was, I would say, average. Mm-hmm. And we started to really focus. And I think that's where the development came, is we knew that this isn't going to happen overnight. We're not going to build this great company or this big, great standard within a few years. We know there's steps to all of it. And I think what Gursh kind of started the question with is, you're always out ahead. And then you start to see people that come in with you on that journey, and they set the standard just as high. And then you try to go a little bit higher, and they'll keep up with you. And that's when it starts to really become beautiful, because then you see individuals take over roles, and that's that whole like delegating, elevating, letting go of the vine. They start to have that standard as well, and then it forms into the brand. And I think so we changed our name, people might know. So we changed to Zeno last January, so a year and a half ago. The reason for that is because now we want to be a brand. So we want it to be more than just Gursh and Kai. We didn't want it to be just us as behind the brand of, hey, we set a standard. That's Zeno. That's the Zeno standard. And it doesn't come with anything other than all the individuals that are on that team. And I think that's really where it started to click and started to come together. And it really showed when we live what we breathe. And I think it probably shows through if you kind of follow us along that journey. We try to live as much as our brand as we can. And I think, that really showed through. Yeah. And that allows individuals to then get on that. And even people, just one last piece on that is, when people come and join our team, they will comment on those things of just being a part of that community or a part of that company that's just, again, a different standard, or they look at things differently than just, hey, you're here to do a job. It's no, you're part of a bigger picture of getting us to 1 million homes by 2040, right? So that has to come with a pretty high standard to achieve that goal.
And I think I'll touch on something pretty interesting that you pointed out there. And you mentioned the name earlier on as well too, is Virtuoso. Yeah. That Virtuoso was our identity. And now we have nice structured core values that articulate what it was that got us to where we are. And I think that's what core values are. Companies that pick them right out of the gate either know themselves very well or are doing it because they think it's the right thing to do. Core values are something that I believe either develop over time, or like I said, the person just really knows. Virtuoso, by definition, is typically attached to music, right? Right. A virtuoso is somebody who's the absolute best, who's the ultimate level of what it is that they can achieve in the art form, right? And we believe that electrical in itself is an art form, and solar is the purest form of that art, right? Is the ability to capture the sun's energy, which if you think about it fundamentally is absolutely nuts. So for us, we thought that was like a really organic way to approach things. But then like Kai said, is first, you got to be able to spell the name. Virtuoso is pretty hard to spell. And then two, you want to make sure that it looks cool. And I think we've gotten to that point. And similar to the Surge, it's pretty slick. And a lot of people that are watching this might not know this, but there's even a lot of thought that went into that logo. And I'd love for you to explain that as well.
Yeah, no, it's, and by the way, the feeling is mutual around what you guys have done with the rebrand. Like it's set a standard in your industry, but just like 10,000 feet above that, I've just always liked them from the moment I saw it, and to use it as thoughtfully as you have, and now to be using it together is insane. So you segue nicely into this, like, when we first began the process of acquiring the team, it was actually going to be launched as a league-owned team. So they had creative already built, they'd had some names kicked around, and they'd almost had a little bit of a structure of what it would look like. And it wasn't really locally connected. It was kind of just going to be floated in, and there was some thought given to it. But they were running a playbook from the league. And I want to give hats off to the league as well. Like, they've been incredible partners. We're proud to be a part of the CEBL, and it's the strength of that team and that organization and what they've done, now approaching their 5th year, of why we're in this. Because every other basketball experiment in this city that's faltered has faltered because the league was not strong. And to see the TSNs of the world and all these kinds of amazing partners coming behind this league is important. But one of the gaps was, I just think, was missing that local connection. So we don't know what we don't know. We're rushing to make an announcement, right? Because you're cutting into your season ticket window the longer you wait to be in the market. And they mocked up a bird that had looked very much almost like the Western Canada Redhawks, like the high school. It looked very much like a college logo, and it was fine. It was good. We'd softly sent it to someone to say, what do you think? And then kind of gave it a thumbs up, and we were like, okay. And it was, I don't know, it was like 2 weeks before we're supposed to launch, and we pushed the launch back a couple days. I just kind of woke up in a sweat, and I knew that if we had to stand in front of the country and launch a team, there could be no second guessing. The standard could not drop just because we're in this frenzied perspective and time is of the essence. We got to get into market, etc. And so I said no mas, couldn't do it. And I remember putting together a mood board really quickly, and 90s Bulls were there, AC Milan was there, a number of other things. And I remember I'd gotten a few examples of these kind of more modern logos, and I kind of sketched something out. And luckily, the league designer at the time understood what I meant by those, disparate details, and really helped us get to this. And the two pieces that you mentioned were, number one, I wanted something fresh. I didn't want, we were going to be connected to Calgary by the work that we did, not because we put the Bow River in the logo, the mountains in the logo, or the tower in the logo. It was going to be something that just became its own energy and identity over time, was number one. Two, maybe there's a few points. Two, was it something that could be adapted? So you could see this changing. You could see the double Pantone version or the flat version. And then the third was the meaning. And originally, it had 5 wings to it. And I was talking with the only person that I talked to while we were making the acquisition and launching the team. And we talked about the city, and we talked about why we were doing this. And it was about uniting the city. And the fact, and specifically talking about his experiences and my experiences with the northeast of Calgary. And it got us talking about this weird fact that we're divided into quadrants. We talk about the southwest, we talk about the southeast, talk about northwest and northeast. And then it became clear that it needed to be going from 5 wings to 4. And that 4 corners of the city was going to define how we engaged community, how we quote unquote marketed, which would be, I'm not interested in just the families that live around Winsport. I'm not just interested in those that engage with just the basketball communities or in the Northwest where the University of Calgary Dinos play. I'm interested in everybody. I'm interested in 1.4 million people. And that's an almost embodied commitment of that. And so to see it now take shape where the logo's together and it's flat and appearing in all these different places, but also maybe the last point I'll say is, you also don't know it was a basketball team. We discussed potentially putting a basketball right there. And we decided against it for short-term pain and long-term gain. The short-term pain was, oh, people don't know you're a basketball team. The long-term gain was, that's the point.
Yeah.
The point was, it's energy, it's a movement, it's feeling. And if we've done our job properly, in years to come, when you see this logo just on a shirt, it not only looks wavy and it's cool and whatnot, but it represents something that's bigger than basketball. It represents, maybe I'll do the turnaround here, but it represents inclusion. It represents, kind of hope. It represents, feeling welcome in all the most commonly spoken languages of Calgary. this here has to live up to that. And that's the mentality behind the logo.
That's huge, man. And I think you touched on so many different things that hit home with me and like hit home with us when we approach this. Is like, it needs to be able to transcend the conversation, right? It needs to be able to also simultaneously fit into the conversation. And the Zeno logo itself, what's the technical term for it?
Monogram.
A monogram. So this piece specifically is actually a solar panel leaning back on a home, right? So you once you actually see it, when you can impose the solar panel onto there, and that actually makes a lot of sense. That was that subtlety, is that you don't actually have to directly be able to tie it into what it is that you're doing, because then you're not actually, I hate to say this, but like individuals that have to make something obvious are obviously not doing anything.
Right.
And realistically, purpose in itself is something that can't necessarily be articulated. And I've had this conversation with a lot of different people, and they're like, oh, as a person, you have so many passions. And it's like, no, I'm just passionate about everything that I do. And you talked about the gift and the curse of being a detail-oriented person, right? I think that's where my curse typically exists, that I get so passionate about every relationship that I'm in that I carry my whole heart into it. But I only now, as I'm older, and obviously I have responsibilities and lives to care for, that I have to be so selective about who gets access to that, right?
Yeah.
And I know, Kai, you're like that as well too, right? Like, what is it that you feel that you have to be guarded with to be able to unlock the full potential of who you are?
That's a good question. I think, I think purpose and passion goes into everything. And I think picking the things that you're going to put all your energy into, that's a big thing with age that I realize, is that there's only so much time, there's only so many things that you should focus all your energy on. And that's pretty much it. Like, you want to be able to, if you're going to spend your time, you want to be able to spend it with stuff that gives you energy and doesn't take your energy. Because I feel like that's one thing that I've learned a lot, is that there's certain situations that'll drain your energy, and there's things that will give you energy. And like, again, we'll bring it back to the event last week. You leave the event like that, you have more energy than you went into that event with, even if you worked a full day, you've done whatever. Yeah. Because you just know just the bigger picture of it, right? And I think it's super cool to see that. And even one thing for us with Zeno is, we'll most likely you hardly see Zeno renewables, because it doesn't matter to us. Because if you're building a brand, you shouldn't have to put what you do behind it, right? Or else it's not a brand, right? You barely see Nike shoe company or whatever, right? It's Nike. Everybody knows what that is, and that's what we want to do. Yeah. And I think that's why I appreciate you guys as well, is because, again, the basketball, it would have been almost cheesy, right? At that point, right? It's you guys have built a brand that when you hear Surge, people know it's basketball. And even already, like, I'm already starting to hear is when people are bringing up to us that, like, well, that's super cool, you guys respond to them, like the basketball team, they're not saying Calgary Surge basketball team, it's just the Surge.
Yeah, and that's wonderful to hear. And I think it's, again, you have to take risks, right? And you have to, you have to say, and this is the difficult part, right? You have to say no more than you say yes, right? Yeah. Especially in the beginning, everyone was sort of chomping at the bit, especially, and this is a very valued relationship that I hold, and I want to sort of give them a plug, is the basketball community in Calgary. Like, so you think about this, you're launching a team, the basketball community in here is very close-knit, less than a degree of separation, in a city that's always less than a degree of separation between everyone here. And they're not really a part of this, right? Like, they're not, they haven't been called or engaged or whatever. I subtly sent some key invitations to the launch. But again, to some people I never even met, but just who I knew from my sport background in the city. And I remember saying, for a month, we're going to take our time to engage them. And the emails are coming, et cetera. We want to do this and we want to do that. And they don't have a sense yet of where to peg you, right? Because you're not, certainly I played basketball through high school and that kind of stuff, but I didn't grow up here. They don't know that. And I remember we brought all of them, as many as we could find, elite trainers, governance people who sit on the boards of like Basketball Alberta, house league people, et cetera, all into our office. And we made a similar proposition around like purpose and passion and results. And to tell them, hey, we may say no more than we say yes in this early stage as we really protect and define what this is, because the moves we make now will define who we become. And the fact that they had the trust to buy into that and say we're going to go slow to go fast. And now to start to see us going fast has been a really, really incredible experience. But I haven't diagnosed as much of the decisions we made back then, and I'm sure we called some wrong. But that risk to just say, no, it's not going to have the basketball. It's not going to say Calgary Surge Professional Basketball Club, and we're not just going to go rah, rah, rah basketball. It's borne out in the data. I'm speaking on a panel in tomorrow, actually. It's for this group called Active City, and they did some engagement polling, and they said, what's your awareness of all of these professional sport or recreation activities? And the Calgary Surge were listed, and all the sort of other teams, minor league professional teams, all the way up through the Flames. And I remember I saw Calgary Surge clocked in at 1%, and we were having a prep for the panel that's happening tomorrow, and they said, how do you feel about that it's 1%? I'm like, I'm surprised it's that high. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, aren't you upset that it's 1%? I'm like, 1% of 1.4 million people is aware of us, and we haven't really advertised, and we haven't really spent and done, bus benches and all these things that sports teams typically do. That's insane to me, that it becomes this kind of like secret. Okay, so we haven't played a game yet. People don't know we haven't advertised for a basketball team. And the resonance is 1%. Phenomenal. Like we're I think in single digit tickets left for the home opener on Saturday. It means that it's resonated with the right people at the right time at this moment. And those are the people with over 1,000 season ticket holders. That's the relationship that I want to value and protect. Our partners' relationship, that's the relationship I want to value and protect. And we know that over time, everyone will wake up. The moment they see that game played, everyone will come. And that number will grow and grow and grow, but it will grow organically, not because we lowered the bar to say, oh, we're a basketball team, rah, 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 basketball. And that's what I'm really proud that we've kept sort of steady on, and certainly you guys have as well.
Yeah, and I think the positivity behind the positioning of that, right? The understanding of like taking a look at the metrics, and I love that, because what that ultimately means is 99% room for growth. And the three of us are really, really big on this in terms of, I don't ever want to be in a position where I'm not growing.
Yeah.
I always want to be around people that are first humble and kind, and second, significantly smarter than me. And I think we experienced that when we sat down with Usman. And we've experienced that with you every time we sit down with you, we experience that. But let's talk about Usman for a second, because I don't think he gets a fair amount of airtime.
Sure.
Because he's hiding somewhere. Like, where is that guy? Like, where is he? Right?
No, he's got like a live feed.
Yeah, a live feed with a camera that he put in when nobody did, right? So like, no, I'm just teasing. He's not like that at all. For those who haven't met him, he is an amazingly generous and humble individual with a level of intellect that is almost unreasonable. And not necessarily from the perspective of like logic, but from social.
Yeah.
Like his social intellect is like unlike anything that I've ever seen. And I think this goes back to what I believe the city of Calgary has. We're well over 1 million people. That's in a single metropolitan, which is pacing us to become the single largest metropolitan in Canada.
Right.
In one specific location, where other areas, GTA, Lower Mainland, Vancouver, those are actually not.
Yeah, they're aggregate.
They're aggregate, right?
Yeah.
So it's impressive what we're doing as a single standing city here. But the piece behind that that's incredible is in such a small population, there is so much talent here. And where do you think that he fits into that overall picture? And why is it that it's so important that he's part of the Surge and, even part of our lives now?
Yeah, no, like for Usman and I have always had this kind of familial connection because, one of my best friends is his brother-in-law. And I remember in the kind of early formative days of our friendship, I moved to Calgary, less than a decade ago. And Umair, who's my friend, we grew our relationship just in community. Like we were volunteering for a couple of things. We supported each other. We're very similar. Where you talk about Usman's social intellect, Umair and I, we could, sit individually in a blank room, stare at the wall, and wait for the next day and be content, right? Like we don't need, that sort of feedback in the way that some do, and that's where Usman thrives, right? So it's that contrast. And I remember he started to bring him around, and this was kind of pre-pandemic, before everything kind of, you lost connection a little bit. And I remember always being mindful that he's a little bit more reserved, a little bit more quiet. But I just always felt comfortable with him because of Umair. And I remember during the pandemic, and probably just prior, he'd had his first son. And then during the pandemic, I'd had my first son. And randomly we find places to call one another and talk about exactly like you said, the city, where it's at. How do we feel we can unlock talent for others? How do we feel we can use our talents? And how do we feel we can support one another? And it's a relationship that grew very organically. And we'd have these late night conversations. And that trust, both from that familial perspective, but also knowing our values, just in the conversations we would have about our kids or, our city, made it so easy that when I saw that press release that a team was moving to Calgary from Guelph, made it so easy for me to screenshot it, text him and say, are we doing this ? And for him to say yes immediately. And I don't think we've spent enough time diagnosing that, and we will probably later on, but that's an insane amount of trust, right? To go through that and have that much confidence in one another. But his place in the city and his place with, I think, people is he just does the right things the right ways. He's very selfless in what he does. We've had such different paths in how we built our careers, and I think not intentionally. I don't think either of us ever thought that there'd be a day where there'd be a camera pointing at us. And I say that earnestly as someone who has a camera pointed at me all the time. And for him who doesn't, it's never been in the mindset of how we've built our careers. And, him certainly school of hard knocks, entrepreneur from a very early age, and familial responsibilities that he's born from a very early age. And mine the opposite, like not feeling very connected to my family, almost having dangerous situations at home, and then finding solace in coaching and education and community, and going down this really, really academic, executive level path, having to meet in the middle and now be in this position where we're almost solving for each other's gaps and coaching. But I give him way more credit than I would give me. He has been like a brother but also like a very good mentor to me in this context, because he's seen so many of the things that I'm dealing with for the first or second time. And the patience that he's had to do that is I'll put something controversial out there, and then I'll see how you guys respond. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. That's an interesting thing in like podcasts and forums like this. Never wanted to be an entrepreneur. And that doesn't mean I never wanted to take risk. It doesn't mean that I never wanted to do things for myself. But I never imagined a world where I created or stood up a corporate structure and had the ultimate responsibility in some ways. My path was always, and you saw how proudly I mentioned those affiliations at the top when I was introducing myself, there were these amazing brands or organizations or blue chip things that I got the privilege to be a part of. And maybe I unlocked another level for them at Calgary Economic Development or Global News Calgary, or any of these kinds of things, Alberta Motor Association. And the reverence that I have for those organizations made me comfortable saying, I'm going to come in and be Jason and build this team or do this thing, but I'm comfortable not wearing the responsibility of all of this. And the reason I am doing that with this was because I really felt uniquely positioned to do this. I didn't think that there was a long list of people that could execute what we've done so far. I felt like I had to do it. I had to take on the responsibility, and I had to be uncomfortable enough to be an entrepreneur, even though I've told everyone in my life very quietly, I don't ever want to be an entrepreneur. And now I know, having gone through this experience and gone through the growing pains of it, yeah, I'm built for it in a lot of ways, and there's some things that I'm going to grow. But I'm curious, A, how that lands with you guys, and B, if you had the opposite experience where you always felt like I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Because I'll tell you, Usman, I feel is like the penultimate commensurate entrepreneur, lives and breathes it. And that's always been our sort of dichotomy. But I'm curious about you guys.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, it's an easy answer for me. I've known since I was like a little kid. I think since the first time I swung a hammer with my dad, I was like, I want to do my own thing and like build something. Mm-hmm. I think it goes back to like almost a cheesy saying, if you want to change the world. I think there was a lot of aspects where the entrepreneurial journey is the path that would get us to that.
Right.
So yeah, I've known since I was a kid. That's very interesting to hear you say that, because not a lot of people in the entrepreneurial community are like that. So
Right.
I would actually say more probably like myself. I'm gonna guess Gursh is in the same manner. Yeah, like you're. Yeah, no, that's very interesting.
So he's shaking his head. Let's go.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Kai, you're right. I think Kai knows my story so intimately, but I don't think he knows it from this perspective. So I 100% believe that, and not necessarily in terms about me challenging you. I see it. And I believe that's the relationship that we have that's so beautiful, is that we're so equal in relation to how we want the world to look, but the paths in order to get there are so fundamentally different. I have an issue with structures, and that's where you have a significant strength. You can see exactly what the formula looks like in order to be able to build the base and then grow from there. Whereas for me, I was very much like NWA, like the police kind of thing, right? Like I was never that mindset of I want to be able to align with these things, to be able to accelerate through them, to be able to get to the top and then achieve these goals that is going to fundamentally make society better. I just wanted to be around people and things that matter to me. And my parents were both entrepreneurs growing up. My mom was a nurse and my dad was a taxi driver. My mom started a home care business. And I was exposed to that at such a young age, as were you, being around entrepreneurs with both of your parents. And that was a piece for me that was super important, is that my parents were so passionate about each other, and they were so passionate about their children, and they were so passionate about their work, and they poured their souls into it. So from my perspective, I feel like I'm in both boats, because I understand the value of the way that Kai sees the world. But from a feeling standpoint, and from what like my gut tells me, I really didn't necessarily understand what it meant to be an entrepreneur.
Right.
All I know is that I wanted to achieve a purpose that was greater than myself, so I could separate myself from the life that I'm living.
Right.
And the reason being is that I realized, as a single person with a single name, that I was never going to be able to make the impact that I wanted to in life. So I needed to figure out the fastest way to separate myself from my being, and then pour myself into society as a whole, because I was born into society. I didn't select it. I was put on a board where the games and the game was already in motion. The rules were already in set. So I needed to play by the rules and figure out how to get my way through the system as quickly as possible, so that I could create my own game.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, and we realize these things are not very tidy boxes, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like,
Not at all.
It's I can look back at my life and say, well, it didn't say entrepreneur there, but the risks that and the buck stopping with me was very visceral, very literal, in a number of different situations. But I think that point that you made is one that resonates with me a lot. Is it's really about, there is some beauty, and even if you're an entrepreneur, there's going to be a limitation to the amount of control that you have. There's going to be you're going to come up against where I can't just do this thing because I have to do this. So you have to at some point understand the dynamics and play the game. And I think that's always why, and this is the focus almost of my doctoral work, is really about cross-sector leadership, and the fact that the challenges that we're facing are becoming, or not becoming, they might have always been this complex, that no one sector can solve it. So if we think that entrepreneurs are just going to save the world and they're going to run their own thing while it doesn't require the support of charitable leaders or nonprofit leaders or government leaders, and the notion that, I go back to this, like, in some ways, you don't think Barack Obama was entrepreneurial? Like, here's this guy, you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Like, here's this guy with this funny name, sort of raised by a mother in all these disparate places, and with grandparents and in the 50th state, so to speak, and coming to a city that he doesn't know anybody, and has to build up like who he becomes, like door by door knocking, gets kicked around and loses an election here, etc., and faces those failures as going to the Democratic convention on his last credit card maxed out, can't get into any of the parties, etc., and takes a last-ditch effort to run for Senate and actually wins, and that puts him in a position to run for president, and now he's one of the most like that is being entrepreneurial through and through and through. It's just in the context of business where I think it's so specific and so unique.
Yeah.
And that's what's allowed me to, I think, navigate this experience, is that, hey, there's going to be things where I know I could pick up the phone and call you guys on the business side of being an entrepreneur. but certainly the same instincts that applied in all the things that I do of risk and being entrepreneurial and doing the right things from purpose and passion are still the same. They're not unchanged, right?
Absolutely. And I believe this relationship is a good example of what you just said, right? Now, we can talk about this behind closed doors, but I think it's probably worth sharing. Let's separate Surge, let's separate Zeno, and let's just talk as friends here. We didn't sign anything because of these things. We signed because of Jason. And I signed up for Zeno because of Kai. And it goes back to what I was saying, and even what you're touching on. It's the person, right? Not the thing and the word that defines the individual, right? So subtracting these two things, what is it that you want to see out of the world, man? Let's forget about basketball. Let's forget about renewables. What is it that you want to see out of the world that we live in?
Well, first of all, I won't bypass that. Like, again, the trust in that text that I sent to Swan, the trust from you guys to say, like, we're in. Like, it's
didn't even bat an eye.
Yeah, and like and I'll be honest, I didn't know that, right? Like, I didn't know that going in, and we'd had, as you guys know, like inquiries, and people were looking at, and then I stopped everything for those reasons, because it wasn't about the number, it wasn't about anything after that. It was like, we're gonna do this together, and that was the moment. So I think that the beauty in that moment is something that I'm sure we'll unpack over years, right? Yeah. To be able to do this, but you know, I've had to navigate. You know, what do you want out of the world? I've had to navigate, you know, purpose and wanting to do good things with the fact that I'm a pragmatist, right? And you know, pragmatists sometimes deal with changing information and deal in some ways with what's right in front of them and tangible. And so I've battled in myself with that question for a long period of time. But over time, and I would say for the last several years, you know, having burnt the candle at both ends, having lived a full 33 as much as can be, highs and lows, I really try and not overthink things. I really try and not. I make the best call with the best information I have. There is no grand scheme. There is no broader strategy. There is no next venture or job or role that I must have. There is no set amount of children that I must have. There is no set, like, it's open because it has to be a calculus that's done with new information constantly entering. And then I got to evaluate and make the best case. And I will live with the fact that I made the best, you know, decision with the best information possible. And so for me, I got to tell you, I care most of anything in my life of my family. I've had enough people talk to me about what they've achieved corporately or in their professional lives, etc., and their personal life has been a mess. And they look back sometimes with regret, sometimes not. And the ones that don't look back with regret left a pit in my stomach, and the ones that do pained me, because I imagined a future where, for whatever reason, and it still could happen, but you know, this life comes to an end at some point. And the only thing that mitigates that process in some ways or makes it any way manageable is that that experience is not one that's done alone. And the greatest success in my life will be, it's the only goal, is that when that time comes, when that bell is rung, that my children and my wife are there. And I'm doing everything I can with the best information I have possible to make sure that that happens. And I will fall short. I will overperform at certain points. But everything else is just noise to me. And so if I got to tell you, my wife is exceptionally talented. Like a world-class scholar, a nationally awarded
she's brilliant.
Scholar. Like I told her this the other day. We got really emotional. She's achieved something that she hasn't shared publicly, and I'm sure she will in due course. And she was with her one of her best friends in our house, and she got the news, and it's really positive, unbelievable, something she's worked for years. And I got really emotional with her. I told her, I'm like, you're my hero. And I've never told her that because the sexy things that I get to do are very front-facing, right? Like, even us being in Calgary is because, you know, Mr. Calgary, right? Like, the fact that she's achieved this thing and done it without the pain that I've had to go through to do it, without the fanfare, has proven to me like that's my purpose. So there may be a time I got to tell you, what do I want to see out of the world? I don't know. I want to do good things the right way with the best information I have. But maybe in 3 years from now, my job is to support her. Maybe I might hang it up for a little bit and support her. Maybe my son needs something. Maybe my future child needs something. And I'll make that call with the best information possible. But I can't even tell you. It's this professional thing. The way I know you guys are so passionate about saving the planet and climate, et cetera, and all of these things that we know matter in the world. I've never had that thing. I'll be open with you. Like, I've never had that thing professionally, but I have had it personally because I know what growing up with it, not having it, is like. And so maybe that's my calling, is why I've taken the time. I walked away with my last executive role to take a year with my son, and why I'll probably take some time with this next child as well. But that's the calling, that's the purpose, and I'll live and die by it, literally.
That's beautiful. And in my opinion, too profound to follow up. I
was gonna say that's a good place to.
Yeah. That was episode 3. Episode 3. And it won't be the last time we're on the show.
Look at this. No, I
definitely don't think this will be the last. There's so much for us to unpack, and in this conversation, I believe we're able to expose a few things that haven't been shared before. Yeah. But simultaneously, we are just scraping the surface of what this relationship has already experienced in such a short period of time.
Yeah, and to do a check-in, post season or anything. Maybe the chip is next to me right here.
Let's like that.
That's what. Listen, you're gonna cut that out if we don't win. But but no, I'll before we end, I got to just say, like, there are many beautiful things that have happened during this business. And again, I can't. It's weird. You can't get a big head about this, right? And you guys know me. Like, I don't have a big head about anything. I frankly, I'm harder on myself to even allow that to be a possibility.
Yeah.
But one of the most beautiful things has been this relationship, seeing it grow, having these firsts together, like seeing this for the first time together, just brilliant. So just thank you for your trust. Thank you for your friendship. And thank you for, like, you guys know this, a very small circle and I don't think people know this, like, the fact that I can pick up that phone and have that vulnerable conversation with you guys, even if I don't pick it up, means more to me than you know, because there's no precedent. We're not running from a playbook, and knowing that I can call you guys and be vulnerable like this and open like this means the world to me. So thank you guys.
Yeah, it's always raw, man. It's always real.
Thank you.
Yeah, likewise, man. Thank you for being you, man. It's another beautiful person in my life, and that I'm grateful for. And I want to close with this as well too. And you talked about your family so much. I always had these visions of my life of me being old and creaky and sitting on some sort of rocker, or, and then there's nothing but like some sort of beautiful nature in the background. And I always saw my wife there, and I always saw Kai there. And I'm starting to see there as well too, man. And there's other people in my life that I'm starting to understand that are super valuable. And I think those are the people that we're going to start having on the podcast, right? Is that really impactful individuals that we believe are changing the world. And that's why it's an honor to have you here today, is that we believe that's what you're doing, man. So that question that I asked, and I know Kai felt it as well too, was from a position of knowing that we think you're a game changer. We think you're a world shaper. And the reality of what you've already brought to life is proving that. And we're super, super excited to see what these next steps look like.
I'm honored. Let's have some fun with it. Like, that's May 27th, Saturday, home opener, 3,000 people.
Yeah.
Game time.
Oh, it's going to be exciting.
Yeah. We'll take a moment to soak that in for sure.
Oh, it's going to be crazy. Good having you, man.
As well. Cheers.